Hello, second hour U.S. history students. I'm sorry I can't be here with you today because I have to attend this Zoom seminar thing. But anyway, we're going to be fine. I get to miss out on a little bit of my TR time that I so savor and enjoy with my students, but you guys might get to squeeze out some extra research paper in-class work time. So that's not a bad give and take here. So let's start. I just want to give a couple quick updates on the research paper work. So at this point, you have done your subject interview, you have written your subject story, you have gotten peer review feedback on that. So you're kind of on a second stage of making that section of your paper good. And we should be really getting into the historical context section of the paper, which means we are doing research, we're collecting research. Remember that research paper check-in is due today. So we're collecting sources, and then we're going to be sort of writing out what we've got, right? We're sort of telling the story in 2-3 paragraphs, the top-down story. How do you cite the information? Okay, so there will be a bibliography at the end, an MLA-style bibliography, and like I put in the assignment sheet, you're free to use easybib.com to cite those or to list those. You don't need to use in-text citations, so there doesn't need to be like a little thing in parentheses that says where you got each piece of information, unless you are directly quoting an expert source, right? So I'll show you an example here from the paper that I gave you, in my example paper. I included in the historical context section a direct quote from President Lyndon Johnson, where he says, "One of the greatest mistakes this country ever made was when we encouraged the South Vietnamese to assassinate this president." And then I put Wernick there in parentheses. And then that sort of points them to the last page, on the works cited page. There's a source, the Wernick source, right? So it sort of shows the reader where I got that direct quote. It's of course always welcome to say, according to the New York Times or according to Britannica.com, you can always do stuff like that. In terms of all the quotes that come from your interview subject, who's the subject of your story, you don't need to put in-text citations for each of those. Your reader, which is me, and your subject, will be able to see at the very end, there is this sort of Chet Welly personal interview that's like cited in the works cited page, not seen there. Thank you for going away. But that's all covered there. So no need to put in-text citations there. You just list that interview at the end, and we assume that's where you got all your quotes from your subject. Okay, so that's that. Let's set that aside. You'll get to work on that stuff later. We're going to talk more TR today. And Theodore Roosevelt is really key. Another reason why he's kind of a key gateway president or a transition president at the start of the 20th century is not only is he imagining a larger role for government in American life and for the presidency in American life, but he's imagining a larger role for the United States in world affairs in a way that really foreshadows or predicts what will happen in the 20th and 21st centuries. And so we're going to see the start of American imperialism today. So our learning targets, I can examine America's proper role in world affairs. We can start to just consider that question of, well, what should our role be? I can assess the Roosevelt presidency, take a step back and consider it all. I can consider the proper role of government in American life. And then this other big one, I can weigh the balance of biblical justice and political idolatry. When are we in danger of turning these things into idols? When are we in danger of turning our vision of robust presidents like TR into an idol in and of itself? And I love me some TR. He is fun. But I am also just sort of like, we need to guard ourselves on stuff like that. So let's jump in. Theodore Roosevelt, the American presidency is expanding and America's role in the world is expanding. When Roosevelt became president at this threshold turning point into the 20th century, the U.S. was going through a growth spurt, just like a lot of you guys did when you were 13, 14 years old. We were expanding again, except it wasn't really James K. Polk style expanding on the North American continent. Our American territory was stretching now beyond the continent of North America. We'd begun to acquire overseas colonies, and this has been a strange and halting process, and we'll talk about that. But I'd say this process of imperialism, and imperialism just means expanding control over foreign territories or over overseas territories, sort of gaining control of that. Sort of what this image there of the eagle, figuratively speaking, which with its wings stretched from the Caribbean on one side to the Philippines and Hawaii on the other, what that means. I'd say this happened because of our growing and booming economy, and it happened because of the age-old American idea, the gut idea we had of manifest destiny, of let's spread the goodness of our way of life. Economically, we were producing so much. Farm goods, for sure, we've talked about, but just industrial goods, everything. Like, we're producing so much that you're always concerned, or you're always in need of new markets, or more markets, more people to buy this stuff so that you can sort of keep the economy growing. And imperialism seemed like it could offer a happy solution to that. Imperialism could also sometimes open up new commodities or goods that you couldn't make in North America, like in Hawaii, where there's, the Dole sugar plantations and stuff like this. And so you can get access to commodities that you didn't otherwise have. I mean, this is the reason why, why the British Empire had, why the British built an empire and why the Spanish built an empire. The Americans are sort of figuring out, like, economically, this is really useful. And of course, there's just this sense that, like, what we have is good. We have a good way of life and the spread the virtues and blessings of liberty to more places and people that are kind of struggling or backwards or living under the yoke of, like, decrepit and decaying imperial powers. We can sort of breathe new life into that situation. Certainly Theodore Roosevelt said we should be in on this game. We should be in on this competition because, let's be honest, he said, the world is a messed up place. I've been around the world. Most Americans haven't. I've seen the world, and like the Spanish Empire is a hollow and decrepit giant, and the Germans are on the march, and I'm not totally sure I trust their intentions. And Japan is expanding, and I'm not sure what this means. And we can enter this game and be a force for good. And TR, behind everything he does, is just a rock solid belief that America is good. Not perfect, but good. And we will be a force for good in the world if we enter into the world. And so why not? Why just leave that to other people and let them play the game? And by the way, let them profit and let them gain leverage and power over us. No. If we're a force for good, we need to play the game and play it well and gain that leverage and power and use it for good. Okay, so that's his kind of vision, right? Taking a step back, how did we even begin to acquire this empire? Well, that happened before TR was ever president, back in 1898 in a funny little war called the Spanish-American War. So the Spanish-American War, again, we're going back in time, before TR is president. In fact, at the time, he is a somewhat obscure figure in the Navy Department. He's certainly seen as a rising political star, but he's not like a household name by any means at this point. And the Spanish-American War, the story there begins in Cuba. Cuba is a part of the Spanish Empire, at least what remains of the Spanish Empire. Cubans don't want to be part of the Spanish Empire. And so there's all sorts of rebellions in Cuba, and Spain is sort of barely holding on by their fingertips to the situation in Cuba as the Cubans are rebelling against them. And Americans, for the most part, are kind of sitting back with a bucket of popcorn, kind of watching this, and probably cheering for Team Cuba. Like, get Spain out of here. What's Spain doing here? It's almost the 20th century, for crying out loud. We don't need the Spanish Empire here 90 miles off our shore, so we just as soon Cuba wins. We're not neck deep involved. There's like Americans who own land and property in Cuba, but like this is Cuba's thing, okay? And then there's an incident that takes place here amidst all these rebellions and uprisings in Cuba, and it pulls us in. And the incident that happens involves a ship called the USS Maine, so a United States ship that's there, and it's parked in outside Havana, and they just announce, hey, we're not here to fight. We're honestly just here to protect American property and help keep America, keep Americans who are living there. It can be like a escape valve for them. We are not here to fight. We're just here to watch. And the ship goes kablooey, right? It blows up. The USS Maine explodes. Newspapers have a heyday. Oh my gosh, the USS Maine blew up. What is it? 200 Americans die. And not only did they die, look at this image from the newspaper. They died and they were blown 400 feet in the air, right? And so a little hyperbole never helped, never hurt newspaper sales. And so there's this story that's created that like the Spanish blew up our ship, our beautiful, beautiful USS Maine. How dare the Spanish do this? And we need to avenge them, and we need to help the Cuban rebels while we're at it. And like, this is our fight now. Well, it turns out later the USS Maine wasn't blown up by the Spanish, which the Spanish were screaming at us at the time. They're like, we didn't do that. It was a boiler explosion. It was an accidental explosion. Anyway, the point is we go to war against Spain. And you go to war against Spain in 1898 because you can win. Even the United States, which is not a world military power at this point by any means, just jumps into the war. Bada bing, bada boom. We fight in Cuba. We fight in Spanish territory in the Philippines. Theodore Roosevelt, again, this guy from the Navy Department who resigned his office to go form his own regiment of troops that he calls the Rough Riders. He, shows up. He kind of sort of follows orders in Cuba, but he's fighting in Cuba, and newspaper reporters are following him because he's a sort of crazy guy, and this is kind of what's making him a household name, right? So Theodore Roosevelt's there in the midst of it, and of course he loves the whole thing because he's like, let's get the United States involved in world affairs. All right, the war is over. The United States wins. This is very much like the Mexican-American War, right, back in the day. And at the end of the war, we'll go, tell you what, we'll take, the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico. We'll take those off your hands. Cuba's going to be independent, but we're going to kind of put our arm real tight around Cuba and say, hey, Cuba, old buddy, old pal, how about the United States helps you and helps you write your new constitution and helps you get your feet off the ground and helps make sure you don't make any dumb decisions that wouldn't be in both of our interests. So again, Cuba has independence, but there's a strong influence of the United States there. We'll give Spain $20 million and say, hope you had fun having an empire. See you later. And that's the end of that. And the U.S. now has an empire. It is now in the game, so to speak. It's got a seat at the table of world powers. And John Hay, the U.S. Secretary of State, said at the end, that's a splendid little war. And a lot of Americans are like, what do we think? It's not universally acclaimed or believed that this is a great thing. But Americans, like the lady in the image, it's sort of like we're trying on, what do we think of being an empire? Is that cool? Is that awesome? Is this sort of us being a powerful new country? Or as some Americans are saying, is this us betraying our own ideals or our own identity? I mean, after all, we were forged in rebellion against empire, right? That's how we were created. What are we doing now? And Roosevelt says, don't be ridiculous, all right? Get off your moral high horse. If we hadn't gotten involved, it's not like if we hadn't gotten involved, we'd be fine, and Cubans would be suffering. And actually, everyone living under the Spanish Empire would be suffering. And we've relieved their suffering and improved their situation. So stop complaining. We're doing good in the world, and you're complaining, right? And that's TR's view on this. And suddenly we have an empire. And Roosevelt says, good. And he's going to make it his mission that this should be something Americans are proud of and interested in sort of increasing our influence in the world because what we have is something good. There is a strange, ugly kind of undercurrent that goes to all this where it's and now we Americans will teach you silly Cubans and Puerto Ricans and Asiatic peoples and Caribbean peoples how to run a nice, orderly country, right? We have all of our American states. There's Texas and California. See all those good boys and girls over there? And there's the naughty Native American sitting back here. I mean, there's a whole bunch of let's say problematic aspects to this. But there was sort of a sense that this is the business now. Now we will spread the virtues of our way of life. Okay. So TR has this vision of a stronger role for America in world affairs. There's an old African saying that he had picked up in Africa that said, speak softly and carry a big stick and you will go far. And Roosevelt just loves this idea, right? You don't need to be belligerent. You don't need to be a jerk. You don't need to throw your weight around. You do need to have a big stick, and by that he just means a military presence, right? And Roosevelt says, I want a navy. I want a formidable navy. We don't have that. We have a little toy navy right now in the United States. I want what he calls a great white fleet. I want a formidable navy to protect our interests in the Caribbean and in the Pacific, and we will be a force for good. But part of being a force for good involves the word force, and that doesn't mean we need to use it, but people need to understand that we have the capacity to use it if need be to protect our interest and to promote the good. And so Roosevelt, some people called him a warmonger because he's going after building up the military, and he's saying, this is how good things happen in the world. This is how your influence is expanded, and this is how positive influence is executed. All right, and Roosevelt's main foreign policy spheres he's looking at are in the Caribbean and Latin America, and in the Pacific. And the thing about the Caribbean and Latin America and the Pacific is to sail from one to the other takes a long, long time because you got to go all the way around South America. So gee, wouldn't it be great if we could actually get this age-old project completed of a canal across the Isthmus of Panama, right? The Panama Canal would speed up transportation between the Caribbean and the Pacific enormously. It's not like Roosevelt had the idea, like he's the first person to say, gee, that would be a useful place to have a canal, right? Then you don't have to go all the way around South America. That idea had been there forever, since Magellan's day. It's just not simple to do. The French had started this up 40 years earlier and had abandoned the project. And it had gotten bogged down because literally it's a bog. It's like a tropical rainforest. It's a mountainous ridge through a tropical rainforest. Trying to dig a trench through that means you're trying to dig deeper and deeper through a mountainous range. And the rainforest means there's lots of rain, which means there's going to be, as you're digging, there's going to be constant threat of mudslides. And so you dig, and then mud sort of piles in on it, right? And so it's not as simple as just digging a trench there because of the environmental factors. It just kept preventing that. It's like, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, On top of that, you have this factor of malaria and yellow fever, which when Europeans show up in these densely populated work zones, it just was like a heyday for the mosquitoes and spreading this disease. So the French had spent millions and millions and millions of dollars and abandoned the project. Roosevelt says, I want to get it done. Right? The United States needs this project to do good in the world. And we are the United States of America, and we are ingenious, and we are hardworking, and certainly I'm just going to push and say, I don't care how, we just want to get it done. And so the United States buys the Panama Canal project from France, and then it's the process of okay, so we need to get we got to take care of business. We buy the project from France, so we get the rights there. We need access to the land. We want to purchase the land. The country that owned that land at the time was Colombia. So TR says, okay, we'll go to Colombia's government and let's make a deal for the land. All right, they're not doing anything with it right now, so the United States is going to build this canal. Colombia's not, so let's offer them some money. And the deal is made with Colombia's president that the United States will purchase that land for 100 years for a price of $10 million. And Roosevelt says, great, good. Got the project, got the land, let's go, begin work. We're going to hand it over to the military and we're going to make this thing happen. And then there's sort of bad news, sir. The Colombian legislature is not ratifying the terms of that deal, and they want more money. They now know the United States is interested in this, and they think they've got us over a barrel, and so now they've raised the stake, and they say they want $25 million. And Roosevelt is furious, and he just says, no. He kind of does the thing of Michael Corleone, my offer is this, nothing, you get nothing. Roosevelt is just absolutely not, I am not going to go along with this, right? And so TR just says, all right, so Colombia wants to play it like that. They want to play it like a banana republic, huh? They want to sort of go up against a civilized nation, and they want to play their jackrabbit games, as he said. So then we're just not going to do that. I want you to get me Philip Bonifaria. Philip Bonifaria is a Panamanian rebel leader, all right? He's the people who lived in the region of Panama who wanted their independence. Roosevelt says, hey guys, I'm your new best friend, all right? I think you should officially rebel against Colombia and declare your independence. And the United States will go ahead and park a warship or two on the coasts outside of Panama, as if to suggest mildly to Colombia that the U.S. doesn't want Colombia to interfere on that. We would like Panama to be its own independent country. And so the Panamanian rebels will rebel. The U.S. warships will be parked up there. The Panamanian rebels did rebel. The Colombian soldiers and officers looked around and they kind of figured out the deal, and they just sort of literally walked back to Colombia. There's no fighting. And suddenly it's yay, the Panamanian rebels go, hooray, we declare our independence for the new independent nation of Colombia. And TR goes, yes, we're happy for you. And now let's talk about a land treaty. A new independent nation of Panama. Let's talk a land treaty. I believe the number was $10 million. Would you guys be willing to take $10 million? And Panama says, yes, $10 million is great. And bada bing, bada boom, the deals get signed, and the United States says, now we're going to go ahead and do this thing. All right? And Colombia, you get nothing. All right, you lose Panama and you lose any money that you were going to get. And Panama, you have independence, you have a nice new powerful partner in the world, and you have $10 million in your back pocket. And the project moves forward. It is not, George Washington's style of like staying uninvolved in world affairs. All right, we are in a different age all of a sudden. And TR just says, this is how good things get done. And the Panama Canal was built and was completed, and it was a lot of American ingenuity. It was kind of remarkable. How did we dig the trench through the mountains? We didn't. We built a water elevator over the mountains, and we eliminated malaria and yellow fever from the region in the process by getting rid of all the mosquitoes. And Roosevelt just says, yes, and I'm darn proud that the United States came in and did that, right? And he even shows up as president. He leaves the country to visit the Panama Canal site, and him being TR, he climbs inside one of these big diggers and just says, I want to operate the darn thing. A lot of critics complain, and they just said, this is not a good look for the United States to be like kind of creating new countries and dealing in heavy-handed ways this way. And Roosevelt, in his autobiography, wrote this. He said, if I had acted strictly according to precedent, so if I had just done what other presidents did, I should have turned the whole matter over to Congress, in which Congress would be ably debating it at this moment, years later. And the canal would be 50 years in the future. The Panama Canal would not have started if I had not taken hold of it. I took the isthmus. I started the canal, and then I left Congress not to debate the canal, but to debate me. And while the debate goes on, the canal does too. And so he says, you can debate me all you want and tisk me if you want and say I shouldn't have done this or that. But while you're having that debate, we'll note the Panama Canal is in operation. And that benefits the entire world, certainly the United States, but everyone else too. So go ahead and debate me. We got the canal built. That's TR's take on this. And so when you take a step back, we look at he's someone who his foreign policy record is sometimes unsavory, all right, or it sometimes is a look that Americans sort of say, man, it's a little heavy-handed, or it's a little overbearing at moments. At the same time, he's a president who won the Nobel Peace Prize for stepping in to negotiate the end of a war between Russia and Japan. He certainly strengthened the United States' global position in the world. He did benefit the world with the Panama Canal. And he did all this without a shot being fired. All right? There was no war or conflict during his administration. He wrote later, he said, pacifists and isolationists like to have people come together and talk about peace, or even sign bits of paper with something about peace or arbitration on them. But they took no interest whatever in the practical achievement of a peace that told for good government and decency and honesty. They always demanded that a thing be done, but also demanded that it not be done in the only way that it is, as a matter of fact, possible to do it. He says, pacifists want the world to be a nicer, better place, right? And then they say, but don't be mean about it. And he says, I'm telling you, I made the world a nicer, better place, right? And they didn't like my methods, but I achieved their end for them. I mean, that's his take on this. By the time he retires in 1908, and we'll get into that because he's going to try and unretire, and that's kind of a mess. But by the time he retires, Brett Favre style, the American economy had been made more equitable, which we learned about last lesson. Many of the nation's most troubling undercurrents had been stabilized, and the U.S.'s position in the world has been escalated, has been made more prominent. So that's our lesson, all right, on TR. There'll be a reflection question, but otherwise, guys, I want you to be working on your research papers. Email me with any questions, and thanks. Great work.